I apologize, everybody, for being late, but we're going to start this meeting at 5 after 5. Meeting started, and we will all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. You could please put your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Russi, roll call.
Councilmember Lau.
Present.
Councilmember Crosby.
Here.
Councilmember Carter.
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Davis.
Present.
Mayor Hepburn.
Present. Mr. Russi.
Yes, we are here to give you a presentation, and this is a agendized study session. So this is on SB9. So council and the public are aware there will be no decision that is made tonight. This is strictly informational to provide council with staff's initial review as it relates to a new piece of legislation that was passed earlier this year and get some general direction before we bring anything back to the council later this year. With that, Eric Shearer is going to give you a presentation.
Good evening, Chair. If you could start the slideshow presentation, please. Just a real brief intro by myself, and I'm going to turn over to Parker Stringfellow, our assistant planner, who's going to run through the rest of the presentation. You can go next slide, Jared. So today, Parker is going to be going over some of the requirements and limitations of SB9, a little bit of the history, and then what our initial thoughts are regarding how it might apply in Laverne. And a lot of times you might hear SB10 along with SB9 in different articles and conversations. The main difference between the two is SB9 is a mandatory law that went into effect January 1st. Where SB10 is basically allows for cities to rezone properties near mass transit to allow higher densities. It's voluntary though. It's not a mandatory requirement. So the city is not required to adopt anything to SB10. Staff is not recommending we do so, as our Old Town Laverne specific plan, which we worked very hard on, basically allows for those type of densities around our future train stations and went through a process back, in 2013. So we don't see any need to do anything related to SB10. I'll also let you know that this is all very fluid. Lisa Kranitz, our city attorney, is on the call remotely. Cities are trying to figure this out throughout the state. And some cities adopted an ordinance before January 1st, so they had some of their local regulations in place. Some cities have heard back from the state that those ordinances that they passed are not legal according to the state in the state's eyes. So one of the things you're going to hear about is some of the things that we think that we might be able to do, some regulations that are aligned with what Laverne has historically done in terms of development patterns. And we kind of have to wait and see until how a lot of this shakes out in terms of case law or other findings from the state as they reply to other cities that have adopted ordinances. It is our goal to bring an ordinance back to Laverne, but until such time, we are simply under the rules of the state's passed bill. So with that, I'll turn it over to Parker.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. We have a lot of information to go over, so bear with me as we do so. So SB9 adds 2 sections to the state government code related to residential housing development. The first is the ministerial approval of 2 units on a single family lot and the ministerial approval of urban lot splits. And as Eric mentioned, it was signed into law late summer last year and it went into effect on January 1st, and it applies to the city even if no ordinance is adopted. As of today, the city has not received any formal development applications for SB9. So adopting an SB9 ordinance would significantly benefit the city of Laverne and allow it to protect and preserve the character of the city to the extent that we are able. The city can do this by implementing objective design standards that are in compliance with state law. It would provide more thorough and clear direction to those who wish to initiate SB9 projects and consistent standards for city staff to apply when reviewing them. SB9 does not apply to land in certain areas. Some of these do and do not apply to Laverne. So the first 2 are very high fire and earthquake fault zones. We do have both of these in Laverne. However, we are using updated building codes which work to mitigate these risks. And so because of that, the exclusion does not apply and the city must allow SB9 development in these zones. Next are special flood hazard areas and regulatory floodways. Largely, we do not have either of these areas in Laverne, so the exclusion does not apply to us here. Next, the city does, however, have designated open space properties that are undevelopable, and SB9 upholds this protection of those open space properties. And last, the city does not have any protected historic districts, but we do have about 25 Mills Act properties, which are exempt from SB9 development. There are three types of residential structures that SB9 prohibits the demolition or alteration of. These are properties that restrict rents to affordable income levels, properties that are subject to rent control, and properties that have been occupied by a renter in the last 3 years. The following are the basic key provisions of SB9 that apply to 2-unit developments. The city must allow up to 2 units per single family zoned lot. This can mean 1 new unit in addition to an existing unit, or 2 new units for empty lots. Objective development standards can be applied provided that 2 units of at least 800 square feet can be built. In a few slides, we'll go over some of the examples of what those objective standards might be. When SB9 projects only utilize the 2-unit development provisions, accessory dwelling units or ADUs, and junior accessory dwelling units or JADUs must still be allowed as provided for currently by law. And in most instances, this would probably result in about 3 units on the original parcel. ADUs or JADUs need not be approved when projects utilize both the 2-unit development and the lot split provisions, which we'll be going over those in a few moments. The bill explicitly calls out maximum 4-foot side and rear setbacks for the units. And the city can require up to 1 off-street parking space per unit, with the exception of properties located within a half mile of a high-quality transit corridor, or properties within 1 block of a car share vehicle. So for the council's reference, the bus line along Bonita Avenue qualifies as a high-quality transit corridor. So this means that the city will not be able to require parking for most of the Old Town Laverne properties. And this provision is similar to the one that's currently applied for ADUs. And lastly, the bill requires that units be rented for a minimum of 31 days. So short-term rentals are not allowed in SB9 units and are not able to apply for city short-term rental permits. As mentioned previously, SB9 requires that cities approve urban lot splits. These lot splits must meet the following requirements. Each new parcel must be at least 40% the size of the original, and each new parcel must be at least 1,200 square feet in size. As you recall from the last slide, the maximum of 2 dwelling units can exist on a single family zoned lot, including one created under these provisions. For a maximum of 4 dwelling units on 2 lots created from 1 original single family zoned lot. Again, this is so because ADUs and JADUs don't need to be approved for projects that utilize the lot split provisions of SB9. So a maximum of 4 units, not 6, is allowed on the 2 parcels created from an original parcel under SB9. The applicant must sign an affidavit swearing their intent to occupy the unit, one of the units for at least 3 years after the date of approval. A property owner nor anyone acting in concert with said owner can have subdivided the lot of an adjacent parcel under SB9. So next here we have an example of a random block in the city of Laverne. And this is representative only. It's just for the purposes of demonstrating how SB9 might apply to these said properties. The area blocked out in red represents a range of plausible space where an applicant may split the lot while still meeting the minimum SB9 lot split requirements. The lots that contain an X above the house indicate that major alteration and demolition of the existing structures must occur if an applicant proposes a lot split under SB9. Because of these limitations, for both regulatory or financial reasons, SB9 lot splits are likely not feasible for these properties. However, 2-unit developments could possibly be approved if they meet the requirements, as well as ADUs. Those lots containing a question mark are those where the existing structures are located such that the lot split could be feasible. depending on where they split and if it meets the minimum requirements, as well as how minor the alterations to the existing structures are in order to accommodate the project. These lot splits could then open the way for 2-unit development as well. And finally, those lots that are unmarked, aside from the red blocks are where the applicants may find the most success in applying SB9 provisions, getting lot splits and getting 2-unit developments approved for their properties with minimal or no alteration to existing structures. So again, this visual is representative only, and it's included here to convey to the council that staff sees that SB9 projects are going to be very much considered on a case-by-case basis because every property is different. So the requirements are going to be quite specifically applied depending on what we see in the application.
And may I ask a question before you get off this slide, or are you done with this slide? Or are you going to?
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is, earlier you were saying that a lot can't be split next to a lot that's already split under SB9. So.
The owner can have 2 properties. They can be split into 2.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank
Right.
you.
So if by coincidence, if two separate applicants are applying, that could work. But if they're together, then it doesn't. Okay. So the lot split provisions continue here. Only 1 lot split per property can be performed or approved under SB9. This means that there are no piggybacking lot splits. Only 1 original parcel can be subdivided into 2 parcels only once. Under SB9, cities can require lots to directly adjoin a public right-of-way, but where this is not feasible, the city must at least require an access easement for the newly created lot through the lot that does have access to the right-of-way. The city cannot require dedications of rights-of-way, nor the construction of off-site improvements, and the city can require public services and facility easements. Cities cannot deny SB9 projects that propose adjacent or connected structures if they meet building code and separate conveyance requirements, nor can they require the correction of non-conforming zoning conditions in order to approve an SB9 project. SB9 provides that the building official may deny a project based on a preponderance of evidence, more than 50%, that the proposed housing development / lot split would have a specific adverse impact upon public health and safety or the physical environment, and there is no feasible mitigation. The adverse impact means a significant, quantifiable, direct, and unavoidable impact based on objective, identified, written public health or safety standards, policies, or conditions that existed when the application was deemed complete, right? So there's a lot involved with that. For example, the Mountain Springs estate up in the far northwest of the city, it only has 1 point of access. And so because of this, ingress and egress is limited. So building any additional units in this area could pose a health and safety impact. That may or may not be able to be mitigated. That could be grounds for the city to be able to deny SB9 projects in this area if a preponderance of evidence exists for that. So that's an example of where it might apply here. The following right here are examples of objective standards that the city could impose on SB9 projects. Again, as long as 2 units of at least 800 square feet can still be built. SB9 says that cities can restrict demolition of 25% of the existing exterior walls, but may allow for more than 25% of a local ordinance provides for it. The city may also impose maximum height, size, front yard setbacks, building separation, lot coverage, lot street frontage, for example, like a minimum 10-foot wide frontage that directly abuts a public right-of-way, required open space, and objective design standards. Additionally, the city could prioritize the order in which these standards get waived if they need to be able to allow up to 2 800 square foot units to be placed on the property, ultimately with the objective of retaining as many of those development standards as possible in the process. So we'll explore this a little bit more on the next slide. So staff has created this sample order of prioritized objective standards. Of course, these standards and their order can be changed according to direction of the council. This is just a for instance. So in the event that the city wanted to apply all of the objective standards that they could to an SB9 project, they still must approve the minimum units and lot splits if they meet the requirements. In any given project, the city may not be able to do that. So they must be able to waive some of these standards in order to accommodate the project. And this list is a sample of what the city might want to waive first in order to accommodate the project.
I'm sorry, is this what staff has priority for us, or is it random?
This is just a samples, a list of what, I guess you could say staff opinion, right?
No,
But again,
this is staff.
right.
It's not just some random.
Right. We did put some thought into it.
Yeah, if I could step in real quick and just elaborate. I think the front yard setback is, a standard provision when you drive down the street where you see that front building line is pretty consistent throughout the city of about 25 feet. Where if we didn't have that requirement, then a house would be up closer to the street and would feel really out of place in that neighborhood. So putting the most importance of that front yard setback at the bottom of the list, I mean, that's the last thing we're going to give up basically in order to provide for the 2 800-foot units, if that makes sense.
Okay, so the idea here is that we would start with number 1, right? If we could waive that first one and get them their units and their lot splits, then great. That's all we'll do. We'll impose all the other standards. If that doesn't work, we'll go to number 2, right? And we'll try that one next, see if they can get it to work, and so on with standards 3, 4, 5, and 6. And as Eric explained, right, the last one that we would want to give up is probably that front yard setback, because that's really going to impact the feel and the look of our single family zones. Okay. Next. So this right here, this chart is just a comparison of what the city is currently using right here on the right for our ADUs, what the standards we apply, and then what standards based on that sample list of the standards that could be applied in the forthcoming ordinance. So if you'll notice here, there's a lot of similarities. Most of them are actually the same. Probably the biggest difference down here is that building separation. The next one, the next portion of the chart, again, you'll see the same thing. A lot of the standards are the same or similar. The biggest difference, again, is probably the parking right here. So it is possible that the city could have more opportunities to require off-street parking for SB9 units than we do for ADUs. So ultimately, this is kind of to show that actually, if we can apply these development standards, they appear to us to be compliant with state law. And so there's actually not a whole lot of difference, or at least not a lot of visual difference in what we could be applying for SB9 versus what we're currently doing with our ADUs. And lastly, we're just going to go over briefly the next steps. So staff will receive feedback and direction from council on what level of objective standards they wish to be included in the drafted ordinance. But first, the approval of the city's general plan housing element is a priority before we move forward on drafting and adopting the SB9 ordinance. Additionally, we'll come back later and redo our ADU ordinance as well, because we're still under that urgency ordinance that was adopted a couple years ago. When we do come back, staff will draft the ordinance based on the council's direction. Then we will proceed with planning commission and city council public hearings to formally adopt the ordinance. So this concludes staff's presentation, and we're here to answer any other questions if you do have any.
What's the rough idea time frame when we are going to bring this back to council? Do we have one?
I would say probably within the next 6 months. Just one other follow-up thing, and Parker touched on it. We have not yet received a formal application under SB9, even though we would have to process that if there was. And I think one of the reasons behind that is that if somebody's looking to add units to their property, the existing ADU allowances is just a simpler and less expensive path forward to build that unit. These SB9 units are potentially going to require major modifications to a property, going through a parcel map, which then, they're losing half their property, even though that they might own both parcels. Each parcel is now half the size of what the property was before. So I think that that with even what's in SB9, that it's not going to vastly change Laverne or any other city for that matter and what we expect. And the fact that a lot of the regulations are the same as ADUs, we have a lot of people that are interested in those, not SB9 as much. And we think that's probably going to be the case moving forward, but we still want to have an ordinance that would be in place. Today, we have one person that we're aware of who wants to pursue, but he has a very large property on a corner of a street that kind of has like a kite shape, if you will, with alleyway access, where if it was split, it's probably going to be the same size lots as his neighbors. He just has extraordinarily large lots. So even that probably would make sense for that person. But in most cases, especially in Old Town or even up in the northern part of the city where the homes are in the middle of the lots, it becomes much harder to do, especially a lot split, but even adding on. And so, we want to be able to control it to the way that Laverne is expected to, but I don't see that SB9 is going to overrun the city or these type of developments, just because the ADU laws are really already there and kind of allow what most people want to do. So Parker, you council want any questions or public comment?
Council, any
first?
comments or questions for Mr. Parker or Director
And I'd
Shear?
just like council to be aware, we also have Lisa Kranitz on from Bob's firm. In case there are other questions, she specializes in this subject.
Actually, I have a bunch of questions.
Okay.
If I don't know, if public's ask questions of this or us, I don't know whether.
We can do public comment first, then come back.
Let's do that.
Okay. We'll go ahead and open up public comment. Do we have anyone that would just speak on that? You can tell us I think we know who you are. So Cynthia Gavaldon, I live at,
Live on Amherst Street. If you guys don't know. So
good evening.
live and in person finally. So sorry, it's just the anal retentiveness is coming out right here on the, yes, I have to do that. So thank you for doing this today. This is very, very important. Many cities out there are really struggling with this, and it's on many levels. Most of them are not in agreement that SB9 is not going to change our cities though. And the reason why is that there's always a bigger picture to all this. And there was a total of about 16 different bills that went through over the past 15 years or so, and everything's building on each other. There's a large group of cities out there, and as of Friday now we have 79 of them, which is signed on to a whole nother ordinance, and it's to stop statewide legislation like this and to push local authority on all zoning projects. I'm asking right now that you also consider signing on to that. Our local cities around here who have already signed on to it were Covina, Azusa, San Dimas, Glendora, and also West Covina. There's a group called the California Alliance of Local Electeds. Highly recommend looking into that group and consider participating with that group. They are really looking at this, the big picture. SB9 does do a couple of things, and we just haven't seen it yet, but we are seeing it a lot farther east. We're seeing these mega conglomerate companies coming in and buying up properties. And you guys might not know it here, but Hartshorn Ranch and Oak, I forget the other cul-de-sac, right there by Lutheran High School. 6 of those properties now have been bought by one company. And it's happening in town, you just might not know it. All 6 of those homes right now are empty. They were historically, 3 of them for sure, had multifamilies in there. We were all watching them. We're very concerned about what was going on. They were all Chinese residents because we've gone there and we've approached them, tried to talk to them. And in one weekend, they were all gone. But when you go on the APN, and you can look up any county APN map now online, it's a great tool that they have at the county. You can see who the ownerships are. And we figured out that all 6 of those properties have all been bought almost in the same time frame by one big company. That's what we have to worry about. And it's happening under our noses. Quite a few, Ranch Cucamonga, Redlands, Highland, Upland is right now looking at all this because of their historical, and they have very deep lots there also. They are looking at moratoriums towards any mega conglomerates buying properties, actually. I'm glad to hear we have about 6 months. There's a lot more behind this. We have to be very careful. With that said, there's also another group out there, and it's actually called Livable California. And they are trying to, they can bring presentations to you And really the root of all this is of course the problems with all the arena numbers. And SB 828, which was quite a few years ago now, that's what all this is founded on. But there's two really good documents now out talking about the math problems in the RENA bill, and the primary source document that they used, it's almost 3 times more in those documents than we needed to be. Southern California's numbers, we're already over all of our RENA numbers, and this could actually all go away. And I was hoping to bring somebody here today to speak to this, but she's actually on a plane right now from Sacramento talking about this. And it's the mayor from your Belinda, and she's an excellent person to talk to. There's 15 cities in Orange County or something like that that are filed a lawsuit against the state on this. They've had multiple people look at the math, look at all these other reports, and they were right. It's very, very disturbing about how far this has gone down the path. And especially because we all want affordable housing. I mean, I do a ton of work in Paris. You guys have heard that before. Well, there's a huge need out there. And I see it out there more than you guys know. But this isn't the way to do it. Then one of the other things that Livable California is doing right now is looking at all the currently built projects coming through. And we sadly have one of the star examples right down the street. The property there at Benita and Gary, those 670 apartment complex, they were supposed to be affordable housing, and it's not. They're ranging from $2,300 a month to $3,600 a month, which is more than our mortgage for a 3-bedroom apartment. That's not affordable housing. What they are noticing is that there's a point during the overall development, which is very common, where you actually have your developer who's going in promising A, B, and C, and then it hits a certain point and it flips over to the end up long-term owner, and they can walk away from everything because we don't have ordinances in place. We don't have the right laws weren't written. And it's really, really a shame, because I know a lot of people around here thought that was gonna really make a difference and a big impact regionally, and it's not. It's gonna be too expensive for everybody. Our own kids won't be able to. On Facebook right now, there's a whole group about trying to find single, rented rooms around right now for a whole bunch of kids out there that are trying to just get out on their own or to try to go to school. And they all thought that was going to be the answer to it. And who can afford $3,600 a month? So I just want to point those out. If you want more information, I have all the links to everything, because this is a PowerPoint where you guys can go through. This is actually all on the RENA numbers and the background on it. It's very, very good analysis. I have the staff report for the SB9 a resolution that city of Yorba Belinda did in January. I do not know if it's been challenged or adopted by the state, though. That's one thing I don't know. But they're pretty careful about that. I have access to this. I have access to the other resolution from Livable California. And that I really do ask that the city step up and do. You'll still have to do this, but just to have the support and be maybe city number 80 in the state. And it's a whole wide range of cities out there that have signed on to that. It's really important. So, but I can forward that all to you guys, but think very, very carefully through this, because it can definitely change things. And there's things we didn't even talk about. Parking, the parking issue. Out in Redlands, the biggest deal is people are now using their front yards for parking lots, and it looks horrible. And these are those lovely old neighborhoods like what we have. They're just lovely. And it's just getting destroyed. They're paving the whole front yard and they're putting 3 cars there. That's what it looks like, just house after house after house. And that's also because of ADUs. Redlands very full of ADUs now because of the school. Kind of makes me wonder about here. So it's the same kind of atmosphere. So anyways, but thank you. But if you guys want that information, I can send it.
Please send it.
Yeah, I
Yes,
can-
please
it's
do.
Just a bunch of links.
Be good information for us to have and see what's happening
Just
other
think-
places.
Just think very slowly on this. Sometimes it's good to pause and really watch what's going on. And you have great people out there that can help. So anyways, thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. Appreciate it.
I wouldn't
Danita Beauchamp, how are you? Good
Doing
evening.
well, Mayor. Thank you. Good evening, City Council. To piggyback on her comments, I would just ask that this council hold off on making any decisions. I realize that there is no decision to be made tonight, but as Mr. Scherer said, it will be back in 6 months. Even at that time, I think may be too soon because she discussed how there's potential litigation that may cause this to all go away. And in my opinion, I think the city kind of jumped the gun with the district voting situation. That would definitely get reversed if Santa Monica's appeals case is upheld, which it's pretty looking good that way. But and you would just have to undo everything you've done, and you've spent thousands of dollars pertaining to that. And I would hate to see that we do the same with this. And as that map showed, a lot of those homes are just people are not going to want to give up their square footage to add an additional unit, even if it means additional income, because their homes are just, the city has beautiful homes here, is why it's a nice place to live. So, and with the state and their arena numbers, the proposed projects that are already in works for the city, we would meet those numbers and actually exceed those numbers as of right now. So going forward, I just think that we need to be a lot more patient before a decision is made, and I request the city for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Danita. Anyone else? Mr. Gabaldon, good evening.
It's a lot different here when there's light. My mask is not fogging up my glasses.
You mean outside light?
Yeah,
Okay.
that
That's what I was
too.
wondering. We don't turn the lights, save energy.
Get out of the caves that we live and work in. Anyway, so I know you all appreciate this, but this has the potential to really ruin the historical character of the city if we're not careful. And I know that you're taking it seriously. But in particular, the Lordsburg area, there's a lot of those properties that I'm sure that you've listed on the reports. They have the potential. And as those families age, those homeowners age, their need for that housing is going to be less because they might decide to make different life choices. But when, as an example, I know somebody in town who he passed, his family got the property and they didn't care about it. Because they didn't live here. And the first thing they did was try to get that property sold. And it's one of those properties that can be split and subdivided and turn into one of those scenarios under which a lot of those restrictions might have to be applied. So I think with that in mind, a lot of serious consideration of this council should be made towards what exactly do we want Laverne to look like in 20, 30, 40, 50 years? Because that's what's going to happen here. It's not going to happen overnight. But it's definitely going to happen, and it'll just be a matter of time before we start seeing it in a domino effect. I'm sure many of you might be familiar with Arcadia. I grew up in that area, and it wasn't of any specific reason or culture shift, I would say, but it was loose ordinances that allowed overdevelopment, huge homes on very small properties next to a home that looks completely different of it. And it turned into this mishmash. And then eventually there was a tidal wave of development and it completely changed the city. It's not the same city. So if this city council wants this city to be closer to what it is today down the road, it has to take this seriously. Additionally, some of the comments and questions I have regarding the work that's been done, has staff detailed a high potential areas assessment in the city? If yes, can that be shared? I'd like to know where is this space in Laverne that has the potential for the greatest change in how it is that it's going to be composed. I assume some of that would be in the TOD district that we're proposing for the Arrow Highway corridor. But I really don't think that the pack and stack and the 3-level housing is really what we want going on in our city just because somebody has a property that they're entitled to develop and sell. Or to Cynthia's comment about developers. I mean, we all here are probably participants in PERS, mutual funds, stock market, and a lot of those mutual funds, they make their money by putting a lot of money in a big pool, and they go and they try to get ROI for their investors. And if that happens in Laverne, this is a premium place to live, but it's a premium place to live, not just because of the homes, but because of the people and the character and what we have here. If we allow this to change, everybody's going to say, no, it's not going to happen here. we have to be, more protective and considerate of what the future may bring if we don't stop it now. And then I think I said this, but staff and council should consider that maybe some of the rules behind the game, if it's going to happen in Laverne, is that there's a big difference between a property owner who lives in the property that wants to split it and maybe has need or the opportunity to develop it versus a developer that comes in from out of town and looks to develop the property. I think that is the enemy that we must protect ourselves against, is those people that have no interest in the city, but they have the money and they have the resources to come in and do what they want to make their money and run. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gabaldon. Well, I'd ask you to, but you're staff, so we'll this way. Do we have any call-ins?
We do have a hand raised by Ms. Kranitz.
So that's staff. So let's
That's
ensure public comment is.
Anybody for public comment on, is anybody else on the, we have no
Nobody
one.
requested prior and there's nobody else on that.
Any other, well, guys, you've already spoken, so we'll go ahead and close public comment and move it up to the dais. Council.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I just want to address a couple of the issues that the speakers raised. First off, I want to make it very clear that this is in place. There seems to be some confusion in a number of our cities among public and also some council members. Regardless of whether you adopt an ordinance dealing with SB9 or not, it is the law and you're required to follow it. So as Eric indicated, the purpose, and Parker indicated, the purpose of adopting an ordinance is to provide more protection to the city, because right now if somebody comes in with an application, you just have to process it and you may not have height limits or other types of provisions in place. But it is the law, you do have to comply. As far as the stopping the statewide legislation that Ms. Gabaldon referred to, that was an initiative petition that was started by Mayor Brandon Redondo and two others. I forget the formal name of it. They have pulled the matter from the 2022 November ballot, and they're going to try again for the November 2024 ballot. So that is not out there anymore. Certainly, I think every city, at least in the SCAG region, or in the Los Angeles, Orange County, Ventura, that really got hit by the way SCAG did the numbers, does agree that the numbers are way too high, but there's nothing that says you don't have to comply with the housing law while any litigation goes through. Of course, the SB9 isn't exactly housing element stuff, but HCD is pulling in SB9 ordinances in their review of housing elements in some cities. The concern about conglomerates coming in and buying adjacent properties, that's the exact type of thing that this legislation prevents by saying you can't, if you're an owner, you cannot subdivide successive properties. So they may be able to file other types of applications. They may be able to consolidate the lots and come in with a planned development, but they can't take advantage of SB9 laws. I'm going down my list. Okay, so district combination. And I think that's probably about it, except for the difference between property owners who live in town versus someone who's bought it. I don't think state law would allow you to discriminate between who owns the property. They've tried to handle somebody coming in and buying up multiple lots by saying that the same owner can't develop successive lots. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
You're good now.
Any questions for our attorney? No? Okay. Then we have comments from council.
Any questions?
Any questions from council?
To staff.
Yes, please.
I just have a couple. He's got lots.
Lots of-
Hi.
Hi.
Just because I can't find it, I want to go with the first question that oh no, here it is. Okay. Just hearing this, it irritates me. I can't stand the idea that they're pushing this on us, and it just makes me sick. Or we have such a beautiful community, and to even think, even if it's possible that this might not happen too much, I think people will try to do something for extra income. The one area that she just talked about, subdividing a lot in multiple lots.
Yes.
Right here, it says that a renter has been occupied by a renter in the last 3 years. Now, the owner has to live there 3 years, right? At least 3 years. If they
Yes.
buy a home,
Specifically, the legislation says the applicant, right? So I kind of cleared that up with Lisa a little bit earlier.
yeah,
Where there was a little bit of
clarify.
confusion whether it's owner or applicant, but specifically the legislation says applicant.
and what's that mean, applicant? Applicant of wants to build the new,
Yeah, basically the person who comes to the counter and submits the application. That's who we would define as the applicant.
so he'd have to live there, he or she would have to live there for 3 years.
He would have
Before.
to sign that affidavit swearing his intent to,
Mhm.
right? Now, our ability to vet that or to be able to prove that or enforce that is fairly limited, I think, at this point. Right now, it's basically, we're leaving it up to, we can include it on a question on an application. And of course, after it's been approved, they'll have to sign that affidavit, but I don't think at this point we have any tools beyond that to be able to enforce that.
Okay. Okay, the other area is the high fire hazard areas, and you're saying that we don't have any in the city, that we don't meet that?
No, we do have those areas in the city. However, we are using updated building codes.
Mhm.
And so those building codes work to mitigate those risks. And so therefore, the exemption for SB9 doesn't apply to us here. So because we're using those building codes, we would have to allow SB9 units to go in those areas. And that's in contrast to what our ADU ordinance says
Mhm.
about those high fire zones.
Right.
And so, that's kind of an interesting juxtaposition.
That's where I was
there.
going with it. And also, I don't know how many people know, but up in the hills, Tim, neighbors buying homes, moving in, can't get insurance because it's a high fire zone.
Right.
And we're having a hard time. Even we were told by Allstate, we don't want to cover that area anymore. So, we're fighting that. So, that I would really want to fight that one because that's ridiculous for our city. One more question, then I turn it over to you. The street frontage requirement for each lot, it says that they have to be facing the street. So it wouldn't be, you can't have like a front house and a back house that would.
Yeah, that's not what the legislation calls out. That's basically what staff, between
What
Eric
we-
and stuff, we've
okay.
kind of worked out that we would like to require that if it's
Uh-huh.
feasible. For the process, for the purpose of kind of keeping more clear and kind of trying to avoid issues that property owners might have with preserving access. Because say if in that case we didn't require them or couldn't require them to have a frontage, where we can say this is your property, that's their property. If we have to require that easement, we could run into problems later on because easements generally aren't, recorded on our map where it's easy to see. And so especially if a subsequent buyer comes in, they might not be aware of that. And so somebody maybe parks their car in there and blocks that access, right? It could lead to, civil issues and stuff. So that's kind of our, that's why we kind of came up with that we would like that the state would allow us to do that kind of a requirement, if possible, to kind of alleviate some of those possible issues that could come up.
Thank you for clarifying.
I can never get this thing on. Thank you. And Robin, thank you for actually covering a bunch of mine too, which is good. But just to reiterate, on page 4, it talks about the high fire hazard and the areas of earthquake.
Yes.
So what you are, and because of that, it was my understanding they could not put an ADU on there because of that, the high fire.
Correct.
But now you're saying we have building codes up there, which might limit it, but it doesn't disallow SB9, just from my understanding.
Correct, yes. But so this, again, because the SB9 and the ADU, those are separate
Yes.
legislation. So we're just going off of what they've told us for SB9. So I guess that's something that we definitely need to look at in the future as we go forward to updating our ADU code or our ADU ordinance. Because we're using those updated building codes, we may not be able to restrict those. But as it stands right now, the way that we have the ordinance, we are restricting those ADUs in that zone. However, for SB9s, it's a different story.
But our building codes might help restrict it, or not?
No,
Okay.
no, because
Okay.
we're using updated codes.
Okay,
They mitigate those.
We wouldn't want to not apply that standard up there for.
The
For
buil-
that very
Yeah.
reason, right?
and then jumping back on page 5, the next page, it says have been occupied by a renter in the last 3 years. These people this would exclude to do SB9 if someone's lived there. So it has to be someone coming in and buying it, and then if it was rented in the last 3 years, they can't do construction right away. They have to wait till that period of time is over.
Yeah, by what the letter of that legislation says. Yeah, again, kind of as I explained before, we have no way of really enforcing it. We haven't been given a specific tool to say that.
Specifically, we're not allowed to demolish a house where they could,
Yeah,
but they could build another back house without modifying the existing residential.
but they also could wait 3 years and then
And then do that.
do what they want. And the same thing with someone that says you have to live there. I could say I'm going to live there, and I could say I pay in rent on my mortgage for 3 years, not necessarily live there, but say I am. And then in 3 years, then I could do what I want. Because after that 3-year period, it's over.
I think if there's an existing house today, I think it'd probably be rare where somebody would want to demolish that house, because that's got value, right? It's still expensive to build units. So more than likely, they're not going to want to demolish a house that somebody's living in, because it's already that asset. It's really finding a place on the property to add another.
But we have seen it in other communities, like the Arcadias, where they come in and demolish a house, and then they put up these mega mansions, or now 2 mega mansions that are very close together. But they could do that if it's after 3 years, a period of time.
If they're using SB9, right?
Yeah.
If they want to just do an addition to the home, there's no requirement that about renter or non-renter. outside of SB9.
Yeah. But you still have your our building codes where you have setbacks where these mega mansions can't be built in Laverne because of the setbacks that we have on our existing homes. I looked at my own home to help expand my bedroom to make a bigger closet, but my setback wasn't there, so I couldn't do it.
Yes.
Those are
Right, yeah,
pieces
our
like that.
setbacks, lot coverage,
Yeah.
it's really lot coverage and floor area ratio that helps to stop that from happening, but.
And that's why we like our building codes in Laverne, because they are set, so it doesn't change as much. Then we got that one answered. And the last one on your prioritized standards. If we have, I really like how you have the front yard setback as a high, very high standard. What about a driveway requirement to get through properties? Would that limit people trying to do this as well? If that was a higher prioritized standard, because it would force people to build something which is very noticeable, not just an easement to walk and have a fire hose go through, but a driveway, a car a lot larger, where that's a higher standard, it would limit more as well.
Right. So in theory, that can be placed, anywhere in that list
Yeah.
as far as priority, right? Again, up to the point where if that requirement precludes them from being able to build the required units or meet the lot split provisions, in that case, we wouldn't be able to.
I know a lot of our houses in the old town Laverne have alleyways, which that would almost diminish that. But everywhere else in Laverne, where there's not the alleyways, it could be a deterrent.
Right.
Right, but notice what he said. He said ultimately, even the front yard setback, if that's the ultimate thing that's precluding them from an SB9 development, that number 7, the highest priority, is vulnerable to SB9. He's not saying we get to say full stop, you can't go past the 5th or the 6th one, you can't develop. They're saying that the prerequisite here is SB9 is law right now. So right now, we don't have any way to say, you know, we really don't want you to do if we don't have an ordinance, somebody could say the first thing they want to do is put the house right up next to the sidewalk. And we'd have a hard time defending that. But if we have this ordinance in place, then we can say, first, we'd like you to figure out whether or not you can deal with accommodating our request that you look at the frontage or your driveway first before you come to us saying that you're going to build the house right on the sidewalk. We want you to look at these other alternatives before you come to us with our most highest priority item. We can't tell them no. So without this ordinance, we're vulnerable to somebody putting a McMansion right off the sidewalk. But with this ordinance, we would at least be defending ourselves some and encouraging people to do development the way we'd like to see it. But we can't stop it. So the notion that we should slow our roll and not suggest our staff develop an ordinance is only sticking our head in the sand and hoping nobody develops before we get our ordinance in place. So if we want to slow the roll, which I think we do, we need to get this ordinance in sooner, not later.
Those are all my questions.
Lisa, I'll bring you in a second.
Yes, thanks.
I just want to follow up the provision that says that the applicant, and it is the only place that this legislation used the term applicant instead of owner, has to sign an intent to live in one of the units for 3 years after the date of map approval. That's one of the loopholes we're really concerned about in the city attorney field, because you can't really enforce an intent. It's not an obligation. It is one of the unexplained provisions of SB9. So I just wanted to bring that up. Thank you.
So a lot of my questions have been addressed by the prior 2 council members, but I do have some questions. And you may not have an answer, but I would like you to try to work with Lisa or figure out if we can find an answer to this. I mean, I think one of the things that got brought up by Ms. Gabaldon was the parking issue, right? And that's a significant concern because that's at a premium. And if we can't regulate that in any respect, then we need to think about what that looks like. My other concern, and I think we've raised this in the past, is what is the impact to infrastructure, right? If you've got more people living in a certain space, what does that do to water, sewer, utilities, et cetera? I think there has to be some sort of consideration for that. I don't necessarily anticipate, some huge boom in the next 2 years, but it is something that we have to think about going forward. Who bears the cost of updating that infrastructure? And are we likely to see any assistance in that? Or, is that going to be another burden that the city ends up having to take on? So those are just, and I get that you may not have an answer to that, because I think like a lot of things, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And so I think, there was good intentions. I don't know if it was fully thought out by the folks who put this together, right? So just something to ask about, because I would be interested in hearing what their resolution is to that. And Lisa hit the nail on the head with this whole affidavit of intent. I mean, as it stands right now, we don't have resources, right, to check on compliance with existing ordinances. It's not until someone reports it or advises us that there's something going on that we can even address it. And so that is a key issue that I would pose to Lisa. I don't know if that's something that is being looked at by cities in terms of challenging the wording of that, and then what happens for enforcement especially for cities like ours that don't have the resources to be able to chase down, are you actually living in this house? Or did you just sign off on saying you're living here? And then as far as the objective standards, I know that you had indicated that the prioritized standards did have thought from staff in terms of, what would be, the order of importance. And I agree that, obviously we want everything to look as uniform as possible to, to reflect the character of our city. So I understand why front yard setback, is of a higher priority, but I'd be curious to know, what was the thought process behind some of this? And I'm not trying to say, without saying it outright, is this the best way for our city to control, like in this order, right? Are these standards the best way for us to control the growth and development that may occur due to SB9? So I don't know if you can speak to that or if Eric can speak to that.
We could probably tag team that.
Okay.
Let's start first with your infrastructure question. And Lisa can kind of correct me, of course, if this is different or if we think otherwise, but at this point, I'm gonna kind of start where we go with our ADUs. So historically, if they meet a certain size requirement, we're able to impose development impact fees, right? And so that gets Public Works involved so that, Director Igo is able to look at the plans if he needs, or kind of consider the size and, how many bedrooms, how many fixtures, things like that. And, to kind of consider the impacts, because I agree, 10, 20 years down the road, this could be a problem, even if it's not in the next year or two, right? So I don't think that there's anything at this point that would stop the city from, if we approved an SB9 ordinance, I don't think there's anything that would stop us from also imposing development impact fees. So I think we could still get Public Works involved to make sure that the fair share is being addressed, as far as making sure that those are up to snuff, right? To make sure that we can protect ourselves and protect the infrastructure down the road. And again, Lisa can maybe provide a little more direction on yay or nay towards that. Yeah. So let's see. The next thing was, remind me again, I'm sorry.
The order of the objective standards, when the staff was looking at this list of prioritized standards, is this the best way to protect? So try to understand what I'm getting at.
Right. Okay.
Is this the best way for us to protect?
Right. So, right. So one of the, I think if you look back, look at number 5 and number 6, which again are still relatively high. So specifically when we were talking about building height and thinking about it, all the minimum requirement is that we're allowed to, is just two units of minimum 800 square feet, right? So if we assume that they're going to keep the existing structure as it is, whether it's 900 or 1200, whatever the size of it is, right? And let's just say the minimum that we have to require is 800. Okay, so let's say they have a really small lot, so setbacks are going to push it back in because we have to maintain that 4 feet, right? So we figured that building height specifically, it's probably going to be very easy to get 800 square feet on a first level, right? If we really needed to go up to a second level, that's definitely going to be the kicker. The likelihood of us needing to approve something that's 3 stories in height for 800 square feet is pretty low, right? So that's why we thought that's something that definitely needs to be considered, but it actually, could actually help us order that. Maybe that's something that we could waive a little bit more, because again, later on, if all we're required to approve is 800, we can push and say, okay, you're allowed to go 2 stories. So you can do a 400 and a 400 to get your 800. And there you go. That's all we're required to give you basically under the provisions. So that was kind of what we talked about as far as building height.
Hang on a second, Parker. I think what I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is when we bring back the ordinance, if we have a rationale as to the order, so to how are we going to use these, to control it in the staff report, you would like to see that explanation so that when you're evaluating, you can understand what staff's thoughts are
Correct.
on those particular issues.
Correct.
So,
And I think Mr. Galbadon alluded to it a little bit in terms of, and correct me, well, you can't correct me, but I think what he was asking earlier on during his comments was about, are we assessing what areas of the city would we be most likely to see some of this growth happen? And is this the right order of standards to control that?
And I think that's going to be a real hard thing to,
Okay.
because we even looked at a neighborhood, correct me if I'm, to give some example, and we were struggling a little bit with how do we apply it and to put that, because, you know, the configurations are unique, even neighborhood to neighborhood. So to be able to say, we can give some idea, but to narrow it down to the highest propensity would probably be a pretty difficult analysis.
I think just generally though, Old Town Laverne is where we would expect most of it to happen, just like ADUs. Most people in Old Town Laverne, they have alleyway access, which is a huge way that you're able to achieve this by having 2 points of vehicle access. You could have people park in the front or the back. And the bottom 3 items on that priority list, those are like the automatic standard things that we look at for anybody that comes and wants to do a roof addition. That's why those are like the key elements, and those are pretty consistent throughout our single family zones in the city. 25-foot front yard setback, 30-foot maximum height limitation, 30 and then 35% lot coverage. Right, the lot coverage is what makes sure that the property doesn't feel like it's overbuilt. So those 3 are I mean, personal preference. You could definitely switch the order, but I would say those 3. The reason why they're at the bottom because we do believe those are the 3 that definitely control the development to be consistent with what we've done pre-Sb9. Where the other things are more minor stuff that at the end of the day, Parker and I and other staff will probably catch on, but you as a neighbor, you wouldn't notice if your neighbor didn't have a 10-foot wide flag lot versus an easement across the driveway. You're just going to see what gets built to the property. Those bottom 3 things is what's really helps to define what Laverne is and what our historic development pattern is for.
Okay.
So that's why those 3 are thicker.
And you actually answered part of my question, because my other question was going to be about existing, approvals when people want to do remodels or want to do, we already have a height requirement in certain areas of the city that you can't go higher than a certain place, so I just want to make sure that we're being consistent in that respect too. And so whenever this staff report comes back, I would like to see some of the rationale behind this, so that we are making it as strong as possible so that we can control the type and speed of growth in our city. I think the other thing that you had brought up was this development impact fee. And I don't know how that's calculated or how far, up you can sort of project or how far out you can project what that fee would look like. Because I would, if there is no legal preclusion at this point to not do that, then I would like to see us really think about what that could mean for us in an ordinance. And if that could be included, or if whether it's in the ordinance or somewhere else where we can capture that. Again, I'm just thinking about how do we protect the cost that may be associated with.
So the EDU or state law limits the city's ability to collect on those fees for units that are over 750 square feet. It's underneath that we can't connect or collect those fees, including parks fees or everything else. So once you pass that threshold, then it's a proportion of that structure that's being built towards what the existing structure is. But that's built into our fee schedule, which you all approve every year. We make modifications. Sean does too. There's nothing in the Sb9 law that says that has this limitation on it. So just like in the house being built on a new property, we would automatically apply the impact fees that would be applicable for what was being proposed. However many meters, if there's 3 units and 3 different meters, they pay for installation. So they do pay for that storm drain, water, sewer, and those fees are and parks fee that goes to parks development is identified to recognize that we're adding a new family to our city, that these are the impacts on there. There's additional discussions that could occur about other potential impact fees throughout the city, but yeah, we will automatically collect those as long as the state law allows us to do so. We don't know if the state's going to come back and amend Sb9 law to try to fix some of these loopholes, if you will, that other cities might have put in. For example, some cities have put a maximum square footage of 800 square feet. So you would have to only build a 800 square foot unit. That's it. It couldn't be 799 or 801 because your minimum and maximum would be 800 square feet. They've adopted ordinances that do that to where then a person has no interest in using Sb9 because they don't want to build 2 800 square foot house. We don't think that'll hold up in state law. We think the state will come back and say, well, we didn't put in there that you can't put a maximum. You can't do this either. So, those are the kind of things that we're watching other cities. We don't want to put ourselves in a position where we're going to be challenged by the state or by a developer, because developers read these ordinances too. They have an idea of what they're allowed to do when they walk in the door, what the city is required to say yes to, and what we might have some authority on. So to Councilman Davis's point, we're a little bit exposed right now because we don't have an ordinance that's tailored to us. And so we do want to bring it back forward, looking here for your feedback. If you had preferences on this order, I think that's probably relative to what we're looking for. If the council said, well, maybe front yard's not the most important thing to us, that lot coverage is, right? It's really kind of was our first guess as what we do for a little bit every day. But definitely open to further discussion on prioritizing that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Davis.
I have nothing more.
Wow. You've heard it all. Well, I appreciate all the comments. I think this is a very important issue, and I appreciate Cynthia and Joe and Danita also. And it's one of those things that they basically tell us what we're going to do without a lot of feedback, and they have been working on it for many, many years, and it's morphed and it's changed, and then they basically go, okay. And there was a lot of people against this. I know the San Gabriel Valley Council of Governments, they were against it. They wrote letters to the assembly, to the state. And it was like the one day and this, boom, it was passed. And so I think this is great. I think we need to put something in place. I think that the development impact fee is very important, because if you're going to build multiple structures, it's going to really tax your sewer systems, your electrical grid, and also your water infrastructure, besides everything else in the parking and all the other issues. But I think obviously we have to have an ordinance. I think it's extremely important. And I do have a couple, just jotting some numbers down. It's like, this isn't cheap. At $300 a square for a 1,200 square foot unit, you're looking at $360,000. Two of those, $720,000. You're looking at an accessory dwelling unit, $850. You're looking at $255,000. And in a JADU at 650 square feet, it's $195,000. We're not talking the other infrastructure that has to go with it. So this is an expensive endeavor. But back to the original point, we need to keep our eye on other cities. We need to keep our eye on the state. We need to keep our eye on everything that's going on with this and watch it closely and slowly watch it closely. But I think we do need to get ordinances in place, because if someone does come in, it's like they can do whatever they want by the state mandate SB9. So I think the consent, we need a vote on this or just a consensus?
No, we're just looking for direction, and I think we have it. You're good with the priority. We have it at this point, subject to what the rationale is, in case you do want to refine it at a later date. And I think we can certainly include that when we bring something back to you in the 6-month time period.
We're all in consensus then. Let's move forward and let staff work on the, even though I know, Robin, you're giving a stink eye,
Yeah.
Robin, I'm sorry.
Understand.
It does. It's one of those things that just happen, and it's like, there's really nothing we can do but just make sure we put in place with our staff and let them monitor it closely. And thank you, Parker. Thank you, Community Development Director Shear. Nice job. Thank you very much. And staff, we are.
Adjourned.
No, we're adjourned to our regular council meeting. We are adjourning at 6:15, and our next regular scheduled council meeting is in 15 minutes. Thank you.